Hello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and for those of you who are here this morning, welcome back. My name is Paula Kroll, and I'm an assistant curator at MOCA. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the afternoon session of our symposium, Star-Crossed Rendezvous, the Musical Legacy of Isang Yun. In working with Haegue on this project, I've learned so much about contemporary classical music and about Isang Yun in particular, and I'm so thrilled to have you all join us in this endeavor of trying to understand Yun as a political figure and as a musical figure. In just a few moments, we will premiere a video recording of Heinz Holliger that Haegue Yang made in Zurich in September of this year. Heinz Holliger is a composer and a musician who is a close friend of Yun's and to whom Yun dedicated a double concerto, along with Holliger's late wife Ursula. We are honored to have Holliger's blessing, so to speak, as we embark on this project devoted to Yun. It's really a special message. We also have a talented group of musicians and composers from the Colburn School showcasing pieces of Yun's music today. First, images with flute, oboe, violin, and cello performed by flutist Eric Bergman, oboist Ginny Bake, violinist Whitney Takata, cellist Serge Kalinovsky, and conducted by Philip Witkopf. Second, Contemplation for Two Violas from 1988, performed by Len Cao and Reng Te. Then we will have Amelia Amy Z performing Königliches Thema for solo violin from 1967, and Jacob Taylor performing Glissé for cello from 1970. Partnering with our neighbors is crucial to the work we do at MOCA, and we are so happy that both Colburn School and the Los Angeles Philharmonic have come together to collaborate with us. Lastly, in the afternoon, we will close with a panel discussion with Ryan Tahoney and Mina Lee, who you've already heard from, who will be joined by Taek-Soo Kim, a celebrated composer and professor at San Diego State University, and Anne Schreffler, professor of music at Harvard University, and moderated by Joy Calico, professor of musicology and chair of the department at UCLA. Now, Heinz Holliger, followed by Isang Yun's music.
Isang Yun, composer, which will be the focus of the conference array. I hope that many people from the American audience will really discover a very rich treasure of great music, of the music of Isang Yun, who is very little played today, as well as in America, as in Europe. Most of his music is concentrated in the programs on the chamber music, but he has also very important orchestral pieces or concertos. And I very much hope that people will realize what they miss in not knowing this great artist who have been so close to mine and who has written so many pieces for me. And I think we are not so rich that we can afford not knowing such great music. To my great pleasure, I heard that our double concerto will be performed. And this was the first big piece he has written for us. Double concerto for oboe, harp, and orchestra. It has many not anecdotic, but even very human, many human relations to our lives, the life of mine, Heinz, and my wife, Ursula. Our marriage took place the 7th of July in 62. Isang Yun has as really as main idea of this double concerto, this fairy tale or a legend which is in Korea, which everybody knows that in the seventh, the two Gemini meet on the Milky Way one day a year, and he thinks that oboe and harp are those Geminis. In the orchestra, there is a cello solo who is contemplating this event, the meeting, with great understanding and sympathy, and this cello is the instrument of Isang Yun, his own instrument. It's representing the composer looking at this seventh date. And in the orchestra there is a second oboe which represents the bird phoenix who comes out of the ashes. The oboe features this very personal or very typical possibility of extremely long phrases that the breath never ends with the circular breathing. Very long notes who develop, or also who take shortly new breaths and then go on. It's like a mirror, I say now mirror, what we talked about, of eternity, of the eternal flow of the river of time. The time is not divided in seconds like our clock, that it is a symbol of eternity, that it never starts, it never ends. And this is one of the main ideas of Isang Yun's music, and especially of the oboe. The harp is more a sort of, it could be a court instrument, imperial instrument, or even the instrument as in Christian religion of the angels, something out of the world, and they communicate together, and the cello, which represents the composer, and bird phoenix, and the crowd of the orchestra represent humanity, really, just the whole world. And the piece is a conception which no European composer would agree to first. It's really in one single movement, a 37-minute long piece, which has an eternal flow of music and flow of time. It's not separated in first movement, second movement, adagio and scherzo and finale. It's not separated in 4 bars or the 8 bars period as music, but it's very different. But it has also very, very familiar aspects, all those brass fanfares. It could be like at the court music. You could think even of a Korean court. Naturally, the gagaku, the court music, is very different. Yeah, in Japan and also in, but it has this ritual ritual surrounding with probably mainly the harp. Later, Isang Yun has written a very, very individual piece for harp. In Balance is the title, and he says it's like a flower moving a little bit in a very gentle wind, or like a little boat, or something, just nature or waves. And this is also represented by the harp, because the harp has this glissandos, the notion to imitate the wind, the blowing of the wind, and there also the many different colors, shades of clouds, of nature, dark sounds, very bright sounds, and also aggressive, percussive notes in very dematerialized sounds like harmonics, which have no root on the earth, which are just suspended in the air. I hope I'm not like a missionary who want to really force you to believe something I'm believing in. But very discreetly, I would be very glad if Isang Yun's music would give a very beautiful echo in all the souls of the listeners.
My name is Joy Calico. I'm a musicologist at UCLA, and it is my pleasure to moderate the discussion that will cap off today's event. I want to start by thanking our colleagues at MOCA for including us in this. It's been really an extraordinary process to work with Kim, with Paula, Michelle, and of course Haegue for inviting, whose brainstorm produced today's event. So thank you for that. It's really a great experience. So what I thought we'd do, we have two scholars we heard from this morning, and I suspect people may want to engage them with questions, so we'll leave some time for questions for everyone. But for those of you who weren't here, we have, our first presentation was Ryan Dehoney. He's a musicologist from Northwestern, an extraordinary scholar. Primarily, I know him best for his work on Morton Feldman. Some of you may be familiar with that as well. And for, I think, really pioneering a theory of friendship networks taken seriously as a way that musical and our other artistic collaboration happens. That is, I mean, we may have experience with the opposite of friendship networks and how art does not happen, but I think it's worth highlighting that process in terms of collaborative projects. So, so he's also really, I think, the musicologist I know who's best informed about the contemporary scene and visual arts as well. So it was great to hear Ryan's presentation and also to have him here. Mina Kim is, Mina Lim. You're Lee, you are Kim. Sorry, I was reading the wrong direction. So Mina is also a musicologist, and I dare to say the leading expert on Korean diaspora composers, particularly headed to Europe. So great pleasure to have you here and to hear more of your work. Thank you for that. We also have a composer with us. So we have a practitioner in our midst. We're all getting along very well. If anybody's curious about the musicologist and the composer, we're all getting along famously. Taek-soo Kim just came up the road from San Diego State. He is a very, very prolific and renowned composer. His music has been performed here by the LA Phil. In fact, you may have heard, if you heard the performance of Korean contemporary composers that the LA Philharmonic did in June, okay. Then Kay Ree was on that program, Eun-suk Chin, Taek-soo's music was featured there, so we are very fortunate to have a really leading composer from the Korean diaspora here with us as well. And then Anne Schreffler is with us, a musicologist at Harvard who has been working on contemporary music and is very knowledgeable about the East German, West German, East Berlin, West Berlin, Darmstadt triangulation, I guess we'll say. So she is going to speak to us about some of that material. So since we had two full-blown presentations this morning, we thought we'd give our two new presenters up to 5 minutes just to get, put out a position sort of that will help us lead into a larger discussion. And I think we're going to start with our composer, with Taek-soo. And because he has slides, we're going to just step to the side so we can all see the slides and you're not looking at our heads.
Thank you for the introduction, and hello everyone. It is my honor we decided to sit, sorry. It is my honor to be here with the eminent scholars today, and I hope you were as well, but I was so astonished by the performance right before this panel discussion, and I think that's the point, to have his music alive, because I have listened to his music numerous times on CDs or on YouTube, but it was such a different experience to hear all those things live. And so I would love to thank MOCA and Haegue for the vision and their dedicated work. Personally, I'm a composer who's interested in everyday object. That's why I was talking about this idea. And that's also why I resonated with Haegue when I encountered her works for the first time 10 years ago in Boston ICA. And because this is that work I encountered, and I knew exactly what it was about. And so I resonate with Dr. Mina Lee's third point about their Yun's and Yang's work intersecting in terms of memory and mediation. So, and then of course, any great artist would, they also developed their into own world based on this familiar idea. And if you didn't notice, the one on the left was Haegue's work, and then the other one was Korean basket. And you know, I had the pleasure of recognizing it. There is another layer you can feel. Oh, I know what it is when you appreciate some art. And then that visceral reaction I had was the same with when I encountered Isang Yun's piece. So that means there is something that is universally Korean to Korean people when you hear Isang Yun's piece. And so I wanted to talk about it briefly. But I will begin with a counter-argument first. So glissando, we heard a lot, especially in the last piece, is a staple in 20th century contemporary music, as in Yanis Xenakis' music. I think that's enough, you got the idea. But also, it was not only in the contemporary music scene. Also, you can hear glissando even in Beatles music. I think that's great. Thank you. So it was an Isang Yun with having the hope to move on, make himself in the European scene first as a composer, as an international figure. He embraced it, and I'm sure he resonated with his memories. And so, and then of course there is the idea that Dr. Ryan Dohoney mentioned about how the brushstroke is inspiring the Korean music. And then this is one of the, well, actually, this is the earliest Korean court music called 문묘 제례악. Excuse me, could you go back and then play it for me? Thank you. Would you mind going to 140? Or just, yeah, if you go back, it's gonna work. So it's called 문묘 제례악, that was introduced in the 13th century, and then Korean people kept it intact even after it was imported from China, technically. And the idea of having the brush stroke, so every note, just in case it doesn't work, every note begins with a bam. And then there are 16 to 32 notes going on at one moment. And then every note begins with bang, and then they hold, and then they end with after like 10 minutes of holding the notes. And then that's lovely. That's how the entire piece begins. But wow. Yes, it's coming. Thank you, that's great. And so you heard, that's the most abstract form or simplest form of the brushstroke, I may say. And then this is another example, more modern, contemporary, 20th century music. I think that's great. So this is called Sanjo, and Dr. Dohoney also showed one of them. And then So we are very, if you grow up in Korea, they teach music to everyone, and then part of the curriculum is Korean music. And then you sing some of those Korean folk songs using the same scales. So it goes by, there is always the vibrato, da, and then that is one part of the list that is universally Korean, and then that's always with us. And even in K-pop, you may ask the question, is it related to K-pop as well? So I'll show this.
요 가창하시는 동안 이렇게 슬쩍슬쩍 보여주시는 그 끄듬 처리라든지
That's great. Yes,
이런
that one.
부분에서 자,
So what struck to me was there was, this is for another thing, but no, it's fine. So there is particular term in K-pop called 끄듬 처리. And that means how you end a note. And that's a thing. That was from an audition program. And then the jury was telling her, your 끄듬 처리 is so attractive. So yeah, it's K-pop, even in K-pop. So that idea is interspersed in Korean life, almost like in DNA in our. So I hope the legacy continues, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for that whirlwind tour of the glissando. All right, next we'll hear a few words from Anne so we can get her positioned in the discussion.
Well, let's see. Does this work? Yeah, good. Thank you so much, Texi. That was really fascinating. I love it. From K-pop to Xenakis. So I'm going to talk about the traveler, Isang Yun, very briefly. There are many ways to be a traveler. The spectrum between proximity and distance ranges from your morning commute to business travel, to tourism, to longer trips to study or work, and eventually one might settle in another country and become an expatriate. Voluntary travel or immigration can be an enriching experience. Many must travel involuntarily. One might immigrate in the face of persecution, be forced to leave one's country due to famine and violence, and become one of the many millions of refugees roaming the globe as we speak, who seek a safe harbor. Sometimes you can stay still and the world travels around you, changing your own identity. For example, I have friends who were born in the German Democratic Republic or East Germany, a country that no longer exists. And there are many other examples. Isang Yun moved through the world and the world moved around him in both peaceful and violent ways during his almost 80-year life. He came as a student to a divided Germany from a divided Korea, then remained in West Germany as a permanent resident and as a Korean expatriate. After his abduction to South Korea, he returned to Berlin, but brute force had changed his status from that of expat to exile, and he changed his citizenship, which officially became West German. He grieved the division of Korea until the end of his life. Both politically and musically, he sought to reconcile political divisions. As Minna Lee put it so beautifully in her keynote, contrasts in his music thus became expressions of the ruptures that shaped his life. And this divided existence, if you will, made him always aware of something that I'm going to quote Nelly Sachs about, a poet, a German poet who Isang Yun actually set to music. And people who live in this divided existence are always aware that, and her line in her poem is, no two see the same thing when they look out of the window. And this is an idea that Yun explored in many of his pieces. You can look out of the same window and see two very different things. The music of Isang Yun is full of conflicts, displacements, and separations, But there are also moments of supreme reconciliation and tenderness. In images, which we just heard, the four instruments often take on different characters. Sometimes each one seems to have its own musical personality and quirks. And this is something that Yun shared with Elliot Carter, with whom he had worked in Berlin 3 years before he wrote Images. In Images, it sometimes seems like the flute, oboe, violin, and cello are so independent that they aren't even in the same piece. But then they come together on these long sustained chords on very high notes. Unlike in traditional Western classical music, these are moments of great tension rather than resolution. And in Western music, oftentimes if it gets to a long note, it's resolution, but not in this piece at all. And he wrote it in prison. It's in the program notes, and so, I mean, I don't want to, I'm not sure how to unpack that. But anyway, just that's a fact. So now I'm going to just talk for a moment about the double concerto for oboe and harp, which is featured in Haegue Yang's artwork, and which the LA Phil will play in March, and which Heinz Holliger spoke so beautifully about in the film that we saw at the beginning of the afternoon. So here, the two solo instruments, who are quite distinct to begin with, oboe and harp, also have their own musical personalities. The oboe, harp, and the orchestra interact in all the ways that people do, by contradicting each other, agreeing with each other, making proclamations, imitating, accepting, and embracing. The extended duet passages for the solo oboe and harp are very intense interactions, full of love and tenderness and eros, but also suffering. The composer tells us that they represent a cowherd, the oboe, and a princess, the harp, from a Korean folktale, and they fall in love and are separated by the princess's father, the king, who is, I think, the brass section, and are banished to the stars, where they must travel across galaxies to meet once a year. But you don't need to know this story or think about this story to follow the dramatic arc of the piece. It's so clear in the music. Yun's scores are beautifully notated with great care and attention to every detail of sound production. Oftentimes, different instruments will have different dynamics in the same moment. And he gives you a very exact instructions on how much glissando and how much vibrato and all of that. So all of that is in there. So we can hear in the double concerto and in many of the other pieces, some of which we heard this afternoon, we can hear the conversations, the contradictions, the arguments, and the tenderness all in the music. One of the things I love about Yun's music is how it can serve as a beacon of aspirations to harmony, political, social, and musical. But in his works, the conflicts that the music depicts are not resolved, but continue to hang perilously in the air. This is not only because divisions are hard to overcome, but also because music, like all the contemporary arts, reflects the fractured world we live in. Yun's music is visceral, and it communicates intense emotion. And it's all the more powerful, I feel, by making audible a beautiful and terrible reality in all of its facets, human and metaphysical, offering no fairy tale endings.
Thank you. Thank you, you for giving us some very different perspectives on the intersection we're looking at today, primarily Isang Yun, but also because this comes to us from MOCA and from a visual artist. And so maybe I'll start with Ryan. You said several things today that really stuck with me. One was about sensory translation, about thinking about the connection between visual arts and sonic art. Thinking about it, you talked about ekphrasis, about synesthesia, the various ways people think about this. I would be really curious actually to hear this from all of you, but it started with Ryan, to think about the clips that we've seen, or if you've had individual encounters with this piece, the Star-Crossed Rendezvous, what is that connection like as a witness to or a consumer of that artwork?
I think I haven't. I've only seen that clip that I showed of
Okay.
the piece, so my knowledge of it is pretty limited.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Haegue, do you want to say anything about how you structured it? Just go to the horse's mouth. as
You
it
haven't
were.
seen it. Okay. Mina, have you
So,
seen it?
It's only been in London, right? Is it? Yeah, it's only been in London.
Only been in
yeah.
London so far. Okay.
Sorry.
Then we'll come back to that question in March after it is here. Maybe that's what we'll do. I would be interested, though, in thinking about the translation you talked about between medium and sensorium, because it's obviously for the artist, but also for the viewer/listener, and that could be any of these other pieces. Do you have other thoughts about how that works?
I mean, I think what I'm trying to get at, and what I appreciate so much about the way that Haegue is working, is she's, at least for me, there's not only the visual and the oral translation, but then there's also this historical. And so I think for me, that's increasingly what I'm becoming fascinated by your work, is this way in which there's a kind of historical depth, and that what at least I'm interpreting as the commonality is that, right, we can identify a certain kind of affect, a certain kind of emotional content, maybe. I hate the word content these days, but you know, that there's something there that can be identified and sort of formed sonically, formed visually, formed narratively. And so for me, that's generally how I like to try to suss out those connections, is to understand not that it can be something like a metaphor, but it's not just kind of banal representation. I don't think that's what's going on at all in what Haegue is doing with Yun's music. So.
I would agree with that in the examples that I have seen. It's some of you may have been at Otis on Wednesday night to hear her artist talk about her work, which was fascinating. And I was struck by the reference to biography as methodology, that she is inclined to take a really deep dive into a historical moment or the biography of an individual, as we see in this case, and to build artwork inspired by or derived from that in some way that is not representational. It's not a literal representation of the biography. It's incredibly, it can be abstract, but it is, the connection is there. It just may not be in the way that would be the most obvious suggestion, I suppose. I wanted to talk about this connection to biography and history as motivation, inspiration, or starting point for your own work, the kind of research that you do, Mina or Anne, or the type of composing that you do. Do you recognize that the idea of biography as methodology is a way that informs your own processes?
Are you looking at me?
I think you're on.
We have 3 musicologists and 1 composer, and then I'm the first one, okay, to be asked. I was contemplating on something else, actually, about how translating I was not thinking about the first question, okay. But actually, may I talk about the first one? Yeah. So in the more visceral sense, Ms. Yang and I had a brief chat yesterday about her interest in contemporary music. And then it didn't just come from her interest in history either, because she mentioned when she was, may I say that actually, may I share it? She went to, too late, sorry. As a college student, she would go to contemporary music festival, concerts. So the awareness had been there for a long time. So I think even if you don't theorize it, there is a visceral understanding, and I can feel some of it as, you know, the accent with the harp and how it makes the floating image, and then that's related to the Korean brushstroke or the Korean phrasing, and then a little bit of accent at the end. All these things made sense to me. So I think it's something that I can looking forward to.
Okay.
And about the other question. Can we move on to someone else and then I can come back to you?
We can come back
Yes,
to you.
yeah.
We can come back to you. Yes. Mina, how about you?
Oh, is it? Oh, hello. Actually, can I also respond to one thing, like the visual and audio
course,
coming
of
together?
course.
So I was thinking about, and your beautiful slides where, you know, the juxtaposition of the score and this artwork. I was thinking one piece that Isang Yun wrote in 1988, it's called Distanzen. And it's, there's a program very similar to the double concerto. It's like the strings are very violent in their, it's lots of tremolos, fortissimo, and they represent the earthly world that's full of chaos. And then there's woodwind section that's supposed to be the heaven, and it's sparse, it's it's peaceful, but it's also, I mean, there can be subjective interpretation of that, but it's supposed to be a heaven in Isang Yun's own conception. And then there's the horn, which is the God figure, right? So, but even without listening to it or reading the program notes, just by looking at the score, you can almost sense that bifurcation, or yes, yeah. So there's that. It's almost like visually he conveys the message so clearly, and I don't think every composer has that, right? But Isang Yun has that aspect. So I was thinking about that when I was looking at your slide. Wanted to share that, and that's one of the pieces. So going back to your question, that's one of the pieces that I was introduced to in grad school when I didn't know Isang Yun, and actually I was. So that was one of the motivations. That piece, I urge you to listen to that work. It's one of the easier pieces to experience of Isang Yun's works, because his music tend to be very complex, I think. And then also, yes, my personal connection to Isang Yun, I actually wanted to study Stravinsky for my dissertation, and then my advisor wisely told me to look at other composers, because Isang Yun, the field was kind of crowded in scholarship. So I started looking at other 20th century musicians, composers, and then was led to Darmstadt Circle, which, of course, Darmstadt Music Festival was established in 1947 in the American zone of Germany, supported by American money, and the motto was internationalism, so they invited musicians, composers from all around the world, and Isang Yun was one of them. And when I realized that there was a Korean composer in the 50s, I felt like I was very surprised, first of all, because right after the Korean War, very few people went out of Korea to study. But for a Korean composer to be part of that, you know, all the well-known composers at Darmstadt. So not that I aspire to be anything like him, but I almost felt like, because musicology, there are very few Asian scholars when I was kind of starting the field. I felt like I had a connection, this one Asian composer among German, European avant-gardists. And so I felt like I had to study him then. So that's how I got into Isang Yun. And this is such a fantastic day to bring him to this center.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I was actually trying to think about when I first encountered Isang Yun's music, and I still cannot remember exactly when. It was a very long time ago. And it was, I imagine it was because for a long time I was working on Cold War and music as a topic. And so, of course, the case of Isang Yun and his kidnapping, it's probably the first thing I learned about him before I heard a note of his music.
Yeah, same.
Right. And I was very intrigued by that. But the more I have gotten to know his music, the more I realized that the kidnapping, it had many effects. In Germany, it had the effect of immediately politicizing him, which I don't think was a terribly political person from in his nature. I think he was interested in humanity. He was interested in reconciliation. He was very interested in unifying Korea. That was a huge political project. And of course, unlike his time when he was in Korea working in fighting against, in the insurrection against the Japanese, that was political, right? But when he gets to Germany, I don't think he was particularly, other than these broad humanistic ideals, all that interested, but he became immediately involved in politics. And West Germany at that time was very left-wing. The artistic circles are very left-wing. And some of them were communist with a small c. I mean, we think of East Germany as being communist, which of course it was in the institutional sort of top-down totalitarian sense. But in West Germany, you had all the chaotic communists, right? And all the factions and everything, and which you couldn't have in East Germany.
No.
And he was immediately taken up by this whole crowd, and I still wonder, I would love to interview him, right? How did he interact with all these people? And one thing I can tell that he did just from his music is he didn't really pay much attention, and his music is very continuous. And it develops, of course, and there are changes. We could hear changes between the 60s and the 80s on the concert today.
Yeah.
But it goes step by step, and he's not following the trends at all. And he's not following the Darmstadt trends either. I mean, he adopts the 12-tone method. He does it beautifully and individually, but he's not imitating anybody. And so one of the things I find most fascinating about him is the continuity. So, having learned about the abduction, I start thinking, okay, well, how did his music change? Well, it didn't really change, right then. It kept going. He kept composing in prison, in the hospital in Korea, and then back in West Germany. It doesn't make a huge change. So this is a man who is an artist who is extremely driven inside himself to be a composer. I can't think of very many people who wanted to be a composer more than Isang Yun. I mean, what he sacrificed and what he did to be a composer, work as a composer. He's following his star, right? I mean, it's very, very continuous. And then I was telling all this group beforehand that the works lists that exist, there's lots of German literature about Yun, and big long articles and works lists, but they all start with 1959. Or 56 or so. I mean, when did he come to Germany? Anyway, they start around then. And the very first string quartet listed in his works list is string quartet number 3. So I'm wondering, well, and he was 40 years old, right? So what is going on with this? And it's a kind of, I think it's a prejudice in a way from the German authors to say, okay, well, we're not going to pay attention to that. But also, to be fair, Yun did withdraw some of his early pieces. But I encountered the first string quartet on Apple Music. There's a wonderful recording by a Korean quartet. I can't remember the name of them. Beautiful, wonderful piece, masterful piece, Western string quartet written in Korea. It's not as if he all of a sudden discovered the West when he came to the West, right? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the political aspects have perhaps overshadowed some of the discourse around Yun. And what I find really interesting right now is the opportunity for younger scholars like Minna Lee and other people working on Yun to really dig into his work, his aesthetic, his artistic work, and not just see everything in the shadow of this event that he did not ask for.
No, I'm sure he did not. Teksu, did you want to come back to that, or should we wait?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
briefly. So my speculation about him in that regard is he's a naturally attractive figure. And then he tends to just become to be in the center of social situations, because when he moved to Paris first, before going to Germany, within a year, he was asked to be the chair of Korean society in Paris.
Oh, wow.
So somehow people just recognize something in him. So he was just seen. I think that makes him a louder figure than he would want it to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, actually. So one of the things, so there is a piece of writing that he published in newspaper before he left for Europe, and that he was defending one of his fellow Korean composers who was experimenting with 12-tone music. The composer's name is Nao Nyang. So this other composer wrote 12-tone piece, and everyone was attacking that composer for writing music that wasn't appealing. And Yun wrote very pointed but he's very, very articulate. He's very intelligent. And I think he had power with his words, spoken words and written words. And he was not afraid to share his ideas. Once he had conviction, he was not afraid. I think that translates to his music, to your point, right? He would not give up writing the kind of music that he wanted to write. And same thing with his political act. I mean, people think of it as political, but he was really fighting for reunification and peace. It was only the last year or so of his life that he declared that he would not be involved in politics because he was so sick of being misunderstood as a political figure. Okay. But probably by then he felt so tired, he was ill. But yeah, throughout his life, he would adhere to his convictions very strongly. So there's something about his character, says something about his character too.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, Amina, bringing us back to the Darmstadt summer music courses and festival. Those of us who teach music history are very familiar with the phenomenon of Darmstadt, and many of those composers are at the canon of the 20th century that we teach. In the United States, why is Isang Yun not part of that? I mean, and this is not just a question for you. I would be interested in hearing it from your perspective. I mean, you're a composer, you teach orchestration, for example. I know Anne has taught Isang Yun in at least one of her courses. I don't know about Ryan, but I'd be curious to know, do you all have thoughts about why he's been so conspicuously absent from what we think of as the Darmstadt canon?
I don't think he had a lot of friends in the States. Okay. I think there was just a lack of personal connection.
Speaking of French kinship networks.
Speaking of kind of kinship networks, the more you study, this is my kind of takeaway from the 20th century, is that everything is based on these friendship networks, and it's not just in a kind of who you know kind of way, but real kind of ties that would have assured that your music got heard, that your scores got across the ocean, right? There were just very kind of, you needed strong networks that he just didn't really have, unfortunately.
So the tour he did when he's at Aspen, and that somehow didn't take? Like he made the tour of the major ensembles and summer festivals, but somehow it didn't.
It doesn't seem, I mean, you can address that more than I, but.
I mean, my take was, and a little bit of speculation added in there, because South Korea and the US were allies, political allies. And when South Korea kind of disowned Isang Yun and North Korea embraced him, I think the US institutions felt uncomfortable promoting his music. I think that's one big reason. And then in terms of musical aesthetics, so I discovered, while I was preparing for this talk, I came across this review of Isang Yun's music from 1981, I forget which festival, but it was one of the festivals in New York, upstate New York. And the review was very interesting. It was critical, not of Isang Yun's music, but of the organizers, the programming of the of that night. And the reviewer said Isang Yun's music was one of the better pieces on that night. However, it was so backward, the programming was so backward, and this is the reviewer writing, that they think they're so forward by bringing someone like Isang Yun, who represents European avant-garde, when American avant-garde has moved so further away from the German avant-garde. Does that make sense? Yeah. So by bringing German avant-garde, that they've somehow gone backwards was the review of 1981. So I think there's this kind of aesthetic fissure, like a huge gap of what is interpreted as new music for the music and avant-garde. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, and I just think, I mean, there's this other performance that I mentioned to all of you. It's his performance of Loyang from 1970 that's played at Carnegie Recital Hall in New York, also played at the University of Buffalo, Albright Knox Art Gallery. And it's juxtaposed, like at the beginning of the concert, Isang Yun, and the end of it is Julius Eastman's piece Throughway, which is this kind of like maniacal, crazy, like putting sopranos in cages kind of theater piece. But again, it's that kind of disjuncture of a kind of, well, here's a German avant-garde style, and then here is what's going on in America. But yeah.
Do you think that was intentional? That
I don't know. I mean, those concerts were often kind of grab bags. I can talk
Okay.
to the organ. I can get more information on that, but that will do us a little good today.
today? Okay, true.
Yes, also I think it's partly the lack of scholarship in Isang Yun to begin with, because his biggest advocate would have been Korean people first. And then in Korea, mainland Korea, his name was erased or demonized. So probably there were, to begin with, not many Korean musicologists to begin with at that time when he could have taken benefit. But at the same time, it was like really demolished by Korean government, by not encouraging to study his music in a certain way, even it was not necessarily spoken.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the political aspect that Minna mentioned, that you just mentioned, is very important in thinking about the lack of the U.S. reception until now, right, until recently. Because Elliott Carter was a big supporter of Isang Yun's first in Berlin when he worked closely with him, and then later on after the abduction, Carter was very active in that group of composers and politicians to try to free him, and it worked. And Carter also helped support him financially because Carter was in a position to do that. But then later on, Carter became disillusioned with Yun personally, because he ran across Yun with a North Korean orchestra at the Warsaw Festival one year, and Carter was very dismayed. So I think you're right. I think from an American perspective, or a centrist American perspective, the association with North Korea, which of course was the only part, as you said, the only part of Korea that played his music. That was perhaps it was counterproductive for American reception at that time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Not unlike some of the East German musicians we know who had no traction in American scholarship in that period. Yeah. Okay. How do we address that now?
I think by writing out what we just talked about. I think it explains it, right? I'm convinced. Good job.
How about in terms of programming, teaching? I mean, I think your point is absolutely what you said earlier about how the place you hear his music in the United States is on DMA concerts, when students need to find music that is not played all the time. That's where I have heard it, is in those recitals in my institutions. So that is important, but it's still not mainstreaming that repertoire. So what if it takes multiple approaches?
I think what Anne said earlier, and I feel responsible now to just look at his music. Just try to understand his music and somehow come up with a frame other than this political figure or East meet West or hop tone. Those have been kind of overused in dissertations and public media. I think those are very easy anchor points, but we need to, for example, like if we think of any prominent composer, I think we have certain understanding of what ties their music, their oeuvre together musically, I think. Isang Yun doesn't have that yet, other than this hop tone idea, which is which is central. But also, once we cling on to that, it can be simplistic.
Okay.
But I think you really, I mean, you really undid that in your talk, though,
Yeah.
for me. I feel like you approaching this kind of dialectical mode for his music was utterly fascinating, and I think gets beyond these reductionist ideas. So you're doing it, I think.
Yes, I'll just continue to do it.
Please.
What about pedagogically?
I mean, I would add him to my Cold War to not help matters. I would add him to my Cold War music class.
Right.
Because because it's
You can't-
fascinating.
You can't avoid it, right? So I figure I do teach it in the Cold War unit, but on the other hand, what I'm going to do now is teach it in other places too. Teach
Okay.
this music in other places. I mean, we heard the enormous contrast between the 1988 piece, the
Yeah.
two viola piece, and the earlier pieces, and of course it is somewhat in line with New Romanticism that was happening in Europe and in the United States, but it's very individual. Of course, it's very different from anything else. Is always the case with Yun. So, but it could fit in that unit, new tonality kind of thing, or I personally, I like to look at Darmstadt sort of on the edges, look at there's all kinds of folks there who from different countries, and they're doing very different things. And, we don't talk about, Pousser and Koiverts and I mean, this is very inside baseball, but there are all these composers there from different countries who are it's not just everybody doing the same thing, right?
No, that's true.
And why should we even think that's true? But it comes out in the textbooks a little bit like that.
I'm definitely Team Passeur, just FYI. I know, I love him, love the guy. Anyway, he's a great composer.
What about teaching composition, orchestration?
Right, because in my experience, we were taught about his music, and then from
And you
certain-
trained, can you tell us where you
Yes,
trained?
yeah. Well, I studied because my teacher studied with someone who studied with Isang Yun.
Okay.
So, yes, grandchild or grandchild maybe. Yeah. But there was so there was always some sort of context, and then some baggage coming with it, and then to take it grain of salt, we weren't trained not to actually worship him too much.
Oh,
Because he was such a big figure in Korea.
Okay.
So it's the struggle I have because there is no common understanding about who he is here. And then to convince the importance in terms of the musical legacy is difficult in a way because many of them would grow up with music that resonate with them in a very different way.
Okay.
So this, to me, I have questioned a lot if this is just personal, I like this music, or it is something that could be universal. And but in terms of topics, I can say, in addition to just his identity or his political natures, he has lots of beautiful colors to begin with, and then there are so many other composers who had their own takes, for sure, but why not including him? It might be, in my case, my self-awareness that I should be cautious about just promoting too much Koreanness because I love it. But I do understand some of his techniques, and then also I don't teach graduate seminar, so next time I teach graduate seminar, I will definitely. Yes.
Well, I'd be curious to know at what point you were studying and his music is held up as this Korean icon. I'm just trying to track the trajectory of when his reputation changes, or were musicians always, or did he always have musician fan base, let's call it, in South Korea, regardless of the state's official position on him? Like, when does that happen?
So I began studying composition officially in 2005.
Okay.
And then one of the first books I bought is this. And then that's there if you go to just Korean Barnes and Nobles, and there were music section, you can find this book. So even if you do not know much about it, but I had known his name before, and then I was just curious what made him so famous. So, and then his name was always discussed in certain ways because it was already washed out. So, whenever I wanted to write something based on Korean folk music, some senior figures would say, Isang Yun did it all, you don't have to do it anymore.
Interesting.
So there was
Interesting.
that, but also there were schools that it continues Isang Yun's tradition. For example, there is this Korean-German composer Young-hee Pak-pan, who was heavily inspired by Isang Yun. In fact, she went to Germany because of Isang Yun. Because
And when does she go?
1971, I think, yes. And then there are lots of Korean students who went to Germany and then interacted with her, or when Lee Sang-yun was alive, with him. And then they came with his technique. And then if you go to certain universities or conservatories, they teach that technique faithfully. So, but if you go to different school, they would actually condemn the other school. So it was a very interesting figure in Korea.
Okay. Thank you.
Young-hee Pak-pan. Yes, P-A-G-H / P-A-A-N.
Actually, can I?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna sound like I'm contradicting what I said before, but also I think what's important in studying or preserving a legacy of a composer is community or school of certain style, a school of thought. And I don't know, I'm thinking of like Schoenberg had like Webern and Berg and other composers who used 12-tone method, and with Isang Yun, it's almost like I think it's tricky to place him, both because his stories were so dramatic, and also in terms of discipline. I think for a long time, because I studied a Korean composer, I think people often automatically identified me as an ethnomusicologist when I was studying music that was very much in the Western tradition.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But when you think about the lineage of his style, there are composers who studied with him, like Toshio Hosokawa is one of them. And Suki Kang, who's the teacher of Eun-Suk Chin. And then there are a couple of Korean composers, Taiwanese composers who were inspired by him, but we rarely talk about them. So I think if we can somehow place him in some corner of music history, then it's easier to understand his music, and we will have more chance to talk about him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to be dominating, but one thing you saw the picture of Lee Sang-yun with some another female person. That's Chen Yi, and then if you have heard her name, she's that is Young Chen Yi. That was from 1985 when Lee Sang-yun visited Beijing. So, and then in 1986, she wrote a master's thesis on muak by Lee Sang-yun. So I got to know her last November. I invited her to South Korea to work with Korean National Symphony Orchestra, and then she ran into Lee Sang-yun again in 1990 when Bernstein did the Pacific Festival in Sapporo. And then there was Carter inviting Lee Sang-yun as one of the composers forums. So yes, so that's Jenny, and then that's Lee Sang-yun. So it was surprising to me that he had connection with Jenny because I have never heard of it. And then the dissertation, her thesis was only in Chinese. So, but I could have figured it out. It was hidden. So it's interesting.
Yes. And thinking also about composers who studied with him, German composers who studied with him? You know, is there a legacy there that can be traced?
That's something that I need to work on. That's my next research topic.
Your to-do list is getting very long. I mean, I feel like we're giving you a big pile of research projects.
Well, we all have projects coming out of this. But one thing I want to say is that, you know, talking about the conservatory students who play Yun's music and how to bridge the gap between that and his larger works. He wrote 5 symphonies and at least 3 operas, maybe more. And these were all done in Germany.
Yeah.
The operas were staged. We saw some some images. And so I would like to see that. I'm really thrilled that the LA Phil is doing the double concerto because I've never heard it live. And, you know, to get major orchestras, opera companies interested is really, that would elevate and publicize his music much more readily than conservatory recitals, and I have to say even more than musicologists, right? So much more than musicologists. So that's the direction I would like to see it go. Let's have some programming with the major institutions, right? And
well, and apparently it takes an art museum to trigger that. That seems to be where this real impetus came from. I want to go back to something else you said, Mina. You said about his wife this morning in your talk. You talked about his wife's memoir. Is she? I'm thinking about this because I'm also working on a different project about the importance of Gertrude and Nuria Schoenberg and the preservation of Arnold Schoenberg's legacy and his publishing, his archives. Did she do something like this for him as well? Is that how that archive or his collection came into being in Berlin?
She was, and Haegue might know this well, right? And right, so she has 2 volumes of memoir, which traces. I mean, that's such a valuable resource that needs to be translated into English. And I did start publishing, and then other projects got in the way. And I realized translation is so difficult. But I really hope that somebody does it, if not me, sometime. And then she recently also published a collection of letters, I think.
Okay.
So that's also in Korean. I think that's one of the reasons why Isang Yun scholarship hasn't really, extended to other scholars. But anyways, so she's done those 3 volumes. In terms of the Isang Yun house in Berlin, I don't know how much work she's done in that regard.
No.
Not. Yeah. Right. So it's just almost one person. Wolfgang Sperrer is the president of Isang Yun House in Berlin, and he's done a tremendous amount of work in preserving, the music. But her memoirs are very, very valuable.
Okay.
Yeah. Quotes his letters. He wrote very sweet letters to her throughout his time in Europe while they were apart, and describing the details of who he met, what he played, what people said to him after concert. So
Okay.
those are there.
And are the scores? Who is this major publisher? Oh yeah. Okay. Boozy and Hawks. Okay. So the scores are accessible, is what I'm asking. So that's not an excuse. No. Okay. Good to know. Are there questions either for our? Oh yes, fireworks. All right. I see we have somebody running microphones. Please use the microphone so we can all hear.
Thank you very much. I have actually 2 questions, and they're going to be directed to Doctors Lee and Schreffler, respectively. The first one is, I know that Unisung, there's a lot of literature about his studies with Rufer and Blocher and so forth, but there isn't really too much, at least in English, about his studies with Ikonouchi Tomojiro. Was there any lasting influence from his studies with Ikonouchi in his mature work? And then the second question is, did Yun have any kind of meaningful context with composers in the former DDR like Eisler, Dessau, Kochian, and so forth?
I'm not very sure about those. The Japanese composer, I would say in late works, not so much. I think once he's gone to Europe, I think he really picked up the German avant-garde and then started using Korean folk impressions of, because he never quotes anything Korean. So yeah, but at the same time, the Japanese modernism was very much influenced by French modernism, Debussy, Ravel, and so on. Somehow, I don't know why, but lots of Japanese musicians in the early 20th century went to Paris Conservatory. And I somehow feel that, I mean, you did say this too, Isang Yun's later music isn't really Darmstadt style either, right? So I do wonder in a very covert way that influence lasted into his music. But I do not have very, very clear answer to that.
What about the East Germans?
Okay, East Germany, yeah, this is something that needs a lot more research, but it is known. We know this from Louise Renser's long interview with Isang Yun. It's a book-length memoir interview, that Isang Yun did visit East Germany a lot, and he did so primarily to visit other Korean composers who were in East Germany. And that's one of the reasons that he got into trouble, apart from visiting North Korea, right? That was probably much worse. But
Probably much worse,
in any case, it is known that he went, he felt that he was, I don't know if there was an association, but in any case, he was either formal or informal head of Korean composers in the Berlin area. And he saw himself that way, and he wanted to be in touch with the Korean composers in the East as well. Beyond that, I do not know. I would find it very probable that he would also have met, well, before I guess, yeah, he could have met Eisler, and he
died
could
in
have met
62.
Dessau and other East German composers. At that time, I just don't know. I don't know. We'd have to look. That's the kind of thing. Speaking of networks, when you research a composer, you can't just research that composer. You have to research, dozens of others and look in their correspondence and see if there is connection there. But the musical scene, the art music scene in East Germany was pretty small, and I think everybody knew each other. So I would not be at all surprised if he did, but I just don't have any information on that.
Hi, yes. I have an observation and then a question. I'm a composer. My name is Anne LeBaron, and I lived in Germany from 1980 to 81, and then I lived in Seoul, where I studied traditional Korean music. My observation is that when I lived in Germany, many of the contemporary music concerts featured Isang Yun and Young-ik Pakpan's music.
Sorry, what years were you there?
80 to 81, 1980 to 81. And I just wanted to share that they were very, very active. My question is that Namjoon Paik, also Korean, what kind of relationship or dynamic existed between him and these Korean composers? He was, one thing that you brought out is networking. And of course, he was networking with John Cage. And so Darmstadt plays into this. And I would just like to hear what you have to say about that relationship.
In the letter to his wife, Isang Yun mentions Namjoon Paik, the first encounter with Namjoon Paik, very fondly. And he was surprised that there was another Korean composer. And then at Darmstadt, they met at Darmstadt. And then he pointed out Namjoon Paik has eccentric ideas, Yes, and then also he was a little too avant-garde to Isang Yun, but he saw him as a younger peer because Isang Yun was already 40-something years old, and Namjoon Paik was in his 30s, and then so. The tone of his description about Namjoon Paik is very admirable. And then that relationship went through until Namjoon Paik became way busier and then migrated.
And they were roommates.
Yes, right. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's a great. Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple things. One, from my experience, Nam June did not have anything good to say about Isang Yun. And the kind of feeling that I had felt, that I'd kind of gotten from a lot of people, was a disappointment that Isang Yun was not political, that he had become kind of neoconservative in his music, and the only reason for doing that would be for political reasons, to have something to say politically. And I don't know, he felt like, I think there was this feeling that he was irrelevant in some ways. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that hasn't been mentioned is the Isang Yun competition in Korea. And I was just talking to Sel Cardan, who after the performance said to me that, oh, you know, all of these players, they've learned these pieces because they're in this competition. He said, all the young players now know Isang Yun's music. So there is a new generation of players that are coming along, and I think all they need is people like, you know, this institution and other institutions, is to give them a voice.
What can you tell me? What was the time frame for? What you said that Nam June Paik did not have good things to say. What's the time period?
This would have been in the 90s.
The 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And there was. Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. That's a very different one. Okay.
Did you want to respond to that, or?
Oh. No. I wanted to point out that you have a question.
No, I'm just, this is a very composerly question.
We have a composer, fortunately.
Right, so, you know, I am a Korean-American composer, but I don't know Isang Yun's music that well. I'm not a professional. So I'm coming from more of a, I guess, a foreigner's perspective, rediscovering Koreanness in my own music. But my question is the formation of his musical language, because we heard such a broad spectrum of music today, and that was so fascinating to me. But he spent some time in Paris, which I didn't know about. So how did he come to his language? Like who did he study? Who did he come into contact with in Paris versus in West Germany? And how did he end up writing the music that he did? What kind of composers did he make friendly network with to really become influenced? And what changed his music? If it wasn't politically always politically charged or inspired, that I'm very curious. Was there scholarship?
Well, so while in Korea, the text on Schoenberg's 12-tone music was translated into, well, first in Japanese, and of course that got circulated in Korea, and many people read Japanese during the colonial era. So Isang Yun was aware of that, and he wanted to study that, the 12th music, because he saw that as the path forward. France, and going to France was kind of accidental, because at that time, for anybody to leave Korea to study, they needed some kind of invitation.
Yeah.
Not everyone, Korea didn't have, Korean citizens couldn't just travel until, I think, 88. They had to have some kind of invitation. And the connection that he had was from France. Some Korean was already studying in France. So he could only secure invitation from a French conservatory. And he actually wanted to go to Germany from the beginning. So he ended up in Berlin via France. France was never his real destination. And one of the letters that he wrote, or one of the journals, I can't remember, he was disappointed by how basically he was not learning the things that he was hoping to learn in France. So he found a way to transfer to or go to Berlin. So from then, his teacher, Boris Blaha, who had, I think, himself studied in China, He was born in China, right? So he encouraged his students to utilize their cultural background. So I think that's how he found his own voice. And also, while at Darmstadt, he sees. I mean, it's an interesting time. 57, 58. He meets Namjoon Paik. He meets John Cage, but also there's Stockhausen, Blaise. So he sees such an array of music, and it feels like, okay, I've come to Germany thinking that I would write Schönbergian 12-tone music in the late 1950s when it's all been said and done. So he realized what he wanted to do was obsolete. So then he really kind of has to forge his own voice. And that's when he kind of looks back to Korean heritage, his Korean heritage. But instead of quoting anything, he just draws on the impression of Korean music and techniques of string instruments and so on. So that's how. But also interestingly, this just came to my mind. He never acknowledges any musical influence. So even if, so going back to your question too, even if he was influenced by some other composers, I've never seen him mentioning any other composer as an influence. That's something to. Yeah. So there's that.
Interesting.
I'm not responding anything specific. Just wanted to respond a little bit in general. I think I was curious about initiating this day, let's say, here where I thought we might have a little bit more free space than in Korean Peninsula or old continents such as Europe, where things has been accumulated and there are interesting comparative studies possible. Whereas here there are very little traces left by him in person in his lifetime. And we are now in 2025. And as a contemporary artist, I was curious how much our lens on him would be, let's say, looking for a realistic traces or historical traces. How much is our aspiration or curiosity would be about, like what we need him as a product of time. I mean, he as a human being just lived his time, right? Which was full of ruptures. He experienced imperial period, the independence, civil war, military regime, democracy movement, and as well as, I don't know, like 68 in Europe and Vietnam War, and I mean all of it was like a time full of rupture. So that definitely shaped him. But he was also, as many artists in our history, was a product of the time. I don't know if he's the source of maybe things that what we can analyze, but how much is actually result of what he went through. And but what I was interested in as an artist and to see is the kind of confirmation about my impression that how the asymmetry in his life, the music and life and maybe politics and art and like homeland and abroad and all of these, like pairing that was incubated in him to my eyes, but in a very asymmetric form. And I don't think that any of us wants to approach these artists with a judgmental lens. But I think this asymmetry itself, how much of it is a quality for us 2025? I think that was my driving force to be here. But somehow, someone like me who was so interested in many figures in the history, West and East, and colonial and post-colonial context, he was very evidential to understand for sure what a violent period it was, so-called the Cold War. I think, like any other artist, I think it's most terrifying thing to lose your complexity. And I have a feeling he was a tragic, if he was a tragic, because he lost his chance to maintain his complexity, complexity, yes, through the violence of Cold War, forcing to be either or, you know. And as someone who was born in 70s and many of his compositions were done before I was born, I have to bridge the time and the memories and all of this. And with the artistic power, I think I can make something folding the time, you know, like I tend to fold things, then what has been flat become three-dimensional, what has been far away become very close, and we can also always unfold. I know this is very artistic approach, but that's the only way for me to unfold this figure like Isang Yun today. Just one small comment about one of the question about the Isang Yun competition, which is probably one and only event which carries his name, whereas all the other concert hall, festival, and organization kind of lost the name Isang Yun because of the violence of the Cold War as well. And I had at that time a daring intention to make a film, and I was interviewing those young musicians who were in Tongyeong and with their intention to participate the Unisang competition. And I was so surprised that none of them knew about his biography. And I think because I thought I was interested in interviewing young musicians in the competition because it's a new generation and it's a different time. But this asymmetry was continuing violent way until today. I don't think it's about Isang Yun. I think it's about maybe regaining some kind of a balance or reconciling with the Cold War, which silently continued somehow. That's my sentiment about the time, so colored by the ideology. And so just wanted to share that anecdote that, which was very shocking and actually discouraged me to continue to film in Tongyeong. Whereas at the same week, I saw all the posters about the International Music Festival, which already lost the name Isang Yun. It's just the Tongyeong Music Festival today. The city of Tongyeong, the hometown of Isang Yun. Still, the poster was sprayed, the commies go home. So I think we cannot ignore the Unisang as a hot potato. It's very hard to grasp. But that shouldn't be the point where we got stuck, I think.
Yes, there was a competition under his name too. I participated in 2009. There was Isang Yun competition, and I won the special prize. But all right, no.
Don't bury the lead. Let's talk about the special prize.
No. It's just. But anyway, but it was there for 3 chapters, and then it disappeared as well. So there has been movements to make his name rise, and then I think it'll carry because his music speaks. But Yeah, I agree with Haegue about what's happening.
And I'll also share an episode. So I was in Tongyang this April. There was a forum on the 30th anniversary of his death. And it happened in tandem with the Tongyang International Music Festival. There are musicians from Europe, mostly Europe and all over Korea and Asia. It's a big program. It's one of the largest new music festivals in Korea. So it started as Isang Yun Festival, and in early years performed mostly Isang Yun's music. So I was told that when it just played Isang Yun's music, it had a problem with funding. So depending on where the government stood on the political spectrum, and also just whether it's left or right, just in general, the fact that Isang Yun was such a politically charged figure, whether he was not, or at least in reception, that people felt uncomfortable just having Isang Yun as the centerpiece. So that's why nowadays maybe there's one Isang Yun piece throughout the entire week of the Tongyang International Music Festival, and it's mostly new music, and there's even Beethoven and so on. So it's been, yes, and people have written about that in both in support and protest.
Interesting.
I thought you raised your hand earlier.
Were you going to say something?
I'm kind of, sorry, hot mic. I'm kind of curious, I mean, with what you've all been saying, that there's a kind of real difficulty of separating out the politics from Yun. And I'm kind of curious, like when we speak maybe about the music, I mean, is it possible to speak about the music without speaking about all of everything else that's constraining it or enlivening it? Or, so, I don't know. Keep it dialectical, that's all I can say.
So I'm trying to figure out exactly how to ask this question, but I run a concert series, and one of the most fun aspects of the job is always to figure out, you know, a work on a concert when you're constructing a concert it takes up a certain part of the pie chart, right? And then the remainder of the program has to have some relation to that. And so I guess I was just thinking, like, how would each of you construct an ideal concert to flatter Isang Yun's music?
I would do Zen for Head by Namjoon Paik to start, and which is a straight line, right? It's about, you know, about making a straight line, which is like the Hauptton technique. So you have consistent lines.
Another possibility would be to have no Korean composers and no German composers. That's actually the one I would try.
Elliot Carter would be nice.
Yeah.
Late Carter could be nice.
Yeah, have some Carter. That's okay, but
Babbitt,
otherwise,
too, could be nice.
free Yun from all of that, right, on this program, and have. I mean, I would like to have a program with Taeksoo on there because you're totally different. It would be really fun to have the juxtaposition, but you know, just to have the music on with, I don't know, well. Yeah, Xenakis or and then younger composers, of course, newer music that may be very different, but that may also be involved with timbre and kind of a there are all kinds of ways you could go. I mean, there's you could have music that's complex like his in different ways, or music that's very simple that uses, you know, maybe very simple lines. Like the Hauptton, you know?
Yeah, you could
but
play like Radig, you know, some long drone type.
Yeah.
Like Cat Lambs for like string quartet, first string quartet
Okay.
could be really good.
All right.
I would do like a Berlin Exiles concert, which could be really cool. So like you could just, Cat Lamb would be awesome. Yun would be awesome. Put Mark Barden on there. Like I mean just. Yeah.
Sorry, one other question.
Do you want a mic?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I kind of hijacked this, but The other question, like one of the things that always fascinates me when I go to, I don't know, like any arts institution is when somebody arrives at a sort of mature style, you kind of know what it is, and it's like wash, rinse, repeat for a while. But on the other hand, it's really telling, like early Rothko or Augustine or Pollock. I mean, those are the three that come to mind right now. Like, they tell you a lot about what comes out of the mature form. And I'm curious because we talked about that sort of historical or musicological rupture in his catalog, right? Where I think it was like before 1956 or so, it was like the string quartet number 1 was the anomaly. And I'm just curious, like, anybody know anything about what comes before string quartet number? Like, Gloria played.
You don't know about this.
Yeah, Gloria played early Terry Riley, and I think probably Philip Glass too, which was 12-tone. Yeah. And so it's just very interesting. Yeah, when you see somebody kind of groping for what they're going to become.
You mean like before 53 or before 56 or
even before string quartet number 1?
even before? So he wrote actually three chamber pieces, 1953. So just before he left for Europe. One is piano trio. One is that string quartet number 1 that Anne mentioned. Oh gosh, my brain. And then there's cellos. I think there's cello sonata, but he destroyed all of them except the string quartet, which got recorded. And it's a wonderful piece, the string quartet. So we can only imagine what the other two pieces were. And then other than that, he's what we have are songs, mostly school songs, children's songs, and art songs. Art songs were very popular in Korea, very much like German Lied. So do they resemble what he wrote in Europe? That's a world of, like, you wouldn't even make a connection. There, yeah, no, you would not make it. It's so mind-boggling how he got to the point in 1953 that even that string quartet number 1 is so different from his art songs, which are essentially tonal, although there are like pentatonic scales and rhythmically inspired by Korean traditional music, but really nothing like non-tonal. But I think in the back of his mind, he was always studying the text of Joseph Rufer's 12-tone music. He was studying it and maybe exercising, but who knows, because we don't have any sketches left. Yeah, so interesting idea. But then I think later, you mentioned mature. So 80s, he wrote those 5 symphonies, right? So he went through a phase where he would write lots of programmatic, using programmatic titles and very intense music. And then almost toward the end of his life, the last decade, he would, it still sounds very avant-garde and complex, but almost mellowed a little bit. And he would write symphonies, which are essentially classical forms. So my impression, and this might change later, but at least at this point, having studied him for a while, I think he was a classicist and he was a romantist. He was a romantist at heart. Yeah, so I guess another way to program his music is group like 20th century romantists, romantic composer together is how I see it.
So yeah, echoing what Dr. Lee said, he had in one of his letters he mentioned he was gigging as a singer, operatic arias in the Korean songs. So he had that as a background, and in addition to being a cellist. And then I think what connects his early days to later days is his desire to include Korean tradition, because he kept talking about during the transition from his earlier pieces to his later pieces. And then one of the ideas he chimed in was how to make it convincing in this competitive field in Europe, in this particular place, because he was dedicated when he moved to the Europe, leaving his wife and family home for 3 or how many years later. So he was dedicated to make it. And then, but in the heart, his strategy, or he had this idea that what distincts him is probably Korean tradition. And then, as Dr. Lee mentioned, there a song, one of his songs very obviously includes a Korean traditional rhythm pattern. So I think that's good. And one of the programming idea, please steal this idea, to let young composers write music based on Isang Yun's inspiration.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. Please join me in thanking Mina, Ryan, Ann, and Teksu.
Thank you all so much. As we've mentioned, this is one of the first of many events devoted to Isang Yun. So in March, we'll have Haegue's exhibition up here at MOCA, and on March 10th, there will be a concert of double concerto at the LA Phil. And those tickets will be free, and they'll go on sale the first week of December. So please look out for that listing. We are so grateful to all of our exhibition supporters and to the supporters of today's program, and I will see you all in March.